Hi, my name is Tandin Tuli, and you're watching Joburg Today.
The Protection of Personal Information Act comes into effect from the 1st of July. But what does this mean for the way your personal information is used by both businesses and individuals? We speak to the experts.
The Protection of Personal Information Act was promulgated in 2013 already, but it will only come into effect on the 1st of July 2021. Basically, it is a law that has been passed to protect our constitutional right to privacy. In saying that, it's important that people understand that there's the right to privacy, but there's also the right to information, which is also enshrined in our constitution. So these acts go hand in hand, but the Protection of Personal Information Act is really there so that data subjects, as we are called by the Act, have a right to know what personal information people are using, what they're using it for, and that it is being protected from harm and from being sold. And if the information does get into the wrong hands, that data subject then knows what steps that he or she can take to protect themselves from any further harm.
Having said that, how does it impact individuals and businesses?
So the Act defines what is called a responsible party. So that is the person, an individual, or an entity, which could be a business or a trust or a body corporate, for instance, that process the personal information. So as soon as you determine the purpose for processing that information, you become a responsible party and you have to comply with the 8 conditions that are set out in the Act. As an individual, you have the right, like I mentioned, to give consent to your information being processed and to know who is processing it, for what purpose they're processing it, and what they are doing to protect that information, and also if they are sharing that information with any other party.
Now, why is it such a bone of contention amongst journalists, for example?
People obviously like to share information, especially from a journalistic perspective. It's what we feed on every day. We want to know what's happening in the world. But in protecting that information, we need to ensure that we're doing what we need to do. From a journalistic perspective, there are some exclusions in the Act that will allow journalists to share personal information during the course of their day-to-day business, but it has to be in the interest of national security, for example, or in the interest of the public. And I think trying to determine that fine line of whether it is in the interest or not in the interest of the public is a fine line, which is obviously causing the contention.
In terms of the penalties that are associated with breaking this act, what do they comprise of?
So there's administrative penalties, and those can be up to 10 million rand in fines, okay? And then there's also imprisonment. So that ranges from 12 months to 10 years, depending on the offence that is being committed.
Now, are these penalties realistic in nature?
So when you talk about an administrative penalty, it's not going to be the general man on the street that's breaching Popi that's going to get an admin penalty. It'll be the responsible party. And in determining the amount of the penalty, the regulator is going to have to take a few things into consideration. So were they doing what they could have done to protect the information? So was there a cyber attack, for instance, on the company, and they had all the fanciest software and security safeguards in place, but the hack still happened? Okay, that's going to lower the penalty. They're not going to get 10 million rand because they did what was in their power to do. But if they were out there selling information so that people can make direct marketing calls, then that's going to obviously end up on the higher scale of the administrative penalty. So there are things that the regulator will consider that could lower the amount of the admin penalty.
Last but not least, how can people learn more about this new act?
So there's a lot of free resources out there. There's some really good pieces in the public domain. If you look at some of the bigger law firms or auditing and consulting firms, they publish a lot of information that people can generally read up on. But it's also important to undergo training. So we've developed a training module called the Introduction to Protection of Personal Information Act in conjunction with New Leaf Technologies. And that is an e-learning module that is available at a very reasonable price to everyone and anyone. So it's important to not only get the information officer of your entity trained, but every employee, because that's where the breakdown happens.
We at Joburg Today asked the good citizens of Johannesburg to adhere to level 4 rules and regulations set by the government, which means we have to look out for one another. If you have nowhere to go, then stay at home. And when traveling, wear your mask and sanitize as regularly as possible. And in the event that you should have flu-like symptoms and unsure of them, please contact your doctor for more advice.